faithfully conveying value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today we're exploring the autobiography of Mark Twain, a renowned 19th century American writer and novelist. His works are humorously sharp, filled with satire on social injustices. He represents American realist literature. Hemingway said, all contemporary American literature stems from Mark Twain, while Faulkner called him America's first true writer. Among his many works, adventure novels appear most frequently and are most beloved, like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Roughing It, and Following the Equator. In truth, beyond these adventure tales, Mark Twain's own life reads like an extraordinary adventure, filled with magical moments from birth to death. Mark Twain was born in 1835, the year Halley's Comet appeared over Earth. He predicted that when Halley's Comet returned, he would depart with it. So, sure enough, when Halley's Comet reappeared in 1910, Mark Twain passed away shortly after. Before dying, he wrote a 5,000-page autobiographical manuscript. Because it involved many living people, he stipulated in his will that it shouldn't be published until 100 years after his death. It lay dormant in an American library for a century, finally published in 2010. In this autobiography, Mark Twain recounts his life with humor while bearing his inner world. Now, let's journey through Mark Twain's earthly adventures via this book, and we'll explore Mark Twain's story in 4 parts. First, Mischief, the hometown adventures of his youth. In this autobiography, Mark Twain devotes about 1/3 to stories of himself and his hometown, as his youthful experiences shaped his lifelong character and became his most cherished memories in old age. Mark Twain was born in a remote Missouri town with exactly 100 residents at the time. He humorously noted, "My birth increased the town's population by 1%. No one in history has ever contributed so significantly." Truthfully, even without that 1% coincidence, young Mark Twain was famous throughout town for being exceptionally mischievous and unconventional. Mark Twain's uncle had a small farm. Near the farm was a creek, and he often sneaked off to play by the creek without telling the adults. But because he was young and not a good swimmer, he actually fell in 9 times, making him the town's most notorious dangerous child. This experience made rivers a symbol of adventure in Mark Twain's heart. His masterpieces, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, all unfold along rivers. At his uncle's small farm, places that drew Mark Twain to explore included the nearby hills and woods. Now, he loved trying all sorts of strange foods, whether it was unripe apples from the woods, unknown wild berries from the grass, or frozen hard pears in winter. He'd eat them all. Once to taste wild walnuts that had fallen from a tree, he even got into a fight with a foraging baby wild boar. There were many snakes in these woods. Mark Twain said that, from a young age, he could distinguish snake species. If he encountered a poisonous snake, he'd flee immediately. But if he met a non-poisonous one, he'd do everything to catch it, bring it home, put it in the sewing basket, and watch his mother and aunts panic. Besides these little pranks, Mark Twain also played a big trick that fooled the entire town for decades. At that time, a hypnotist came to town, set up a stage to perform hypnosis. The townspeople were skeptical but curious, all rushing to see the spectacle. Mark Twain wasn't very interested in hypnosis, but he thought it was a great opportunity to show off. He tried every way to attract the hypnotist's attention and was finally called on stage. The hypnosis didn't work, but to stay on stage, he tried hard to follow the hypnotist's commands, even cutting his finger with a knife without flinching. This incident made the entire town firmly believe in the miraculous effects of hypnosis. This wasn't even the most terrifying adventure of Mark Twain's youth. There was a time when measles broke out in the town. Medical conditions were limited then, and most sick children died. The whole town was in panic, afraid of getting infected. Yet, Mark Twain sneaked to a friend's house who had measles, crawled into the child's bed, hugged him to sleep, and then got infected, almost dying. As for his motive in doing this, Mark Twain said, "I don't remember now if I was afraid of getting infected. I only remember being utterly bored." Living under the constant fear of death, that feeling of life trapped me in daily agony. I felt life had no joy and decided to find a way to free myself. He was eventually saved by a doctor. The doctor diagnosed Mark Twain as incurable, so in desperation, he poured a whole bag of hot lime powder on him, unexpectedly saving his life. This near-death experience became Mark Twain's most unforgettable moment. He wrote, "Death made me lose interest in everything. I felt a joy in escaping. It's the most peaceful, serene, and sweetest state." Later, Mark Twain asked his mother if she was worried he might die. His mother replied, "Yes, very worried. Worried that you would survive." This mutual teasing was the consistent pattern between Mark Twain and his mother, and the source of his humor. He said his mother was the person who influenced him most. The warm-hearted, generous women in his novels, like Aunt Polly and Tom Sawyer, were largely based on her. About his mother, Mark Twain also recounted a small incident he couldn't forget for decades. Once there was a black slave sold from afar in their home. The child was very lively, singing and jumping all day. Mark Twain couldn't stand the noise and asked his mother to punish the child. Upon hearing this, his mother actually cried. "He sings," she said, meaning he's not dwelling on sorrows or missing his mother. "That puts my mind at ease." When you grow up, you'll understand that for such a lonely child, the noise is actually pleasant. His mother's words touched Mark Twain's heart, making him feel the kindness and tolerance in human nature. This kindness from his mother neutralized the sharpness and harshness in Mark Twain's character. His future works, though known for sharp satire, always carried a sense of compassion for humanity. He said, "For all human misdeeds, the only proper feeling is pity." At 12, his father died of illness. To support the family, Mark Twain ended his schooling and worked at a local newspaper office. As a printer, he was exposed to news and writing, eventually embarking on a writing career. And next, we'll discuss the second stage of Mark Twain's adventure journey, the workplace adventures of a young reporter. The 1850s saw the most rapid growth in America's newspaper industry, when anyone with printing equipment could start a paper with minimal formalities. So, Mark Twain's hometown had several newspapers, but none had high circulation. Newspaper offices had few staff, so as a printer, he was often pulled into reporting, gradually gaining writing experience and becoming a professional journalist. Mark Twain mainly covered government news with a distinctive style. For example, he'd compare the government to a zoo, saying politicians' shows were like comical animal acts designed to deceive the public. This ironic, mocking style made his reports popular, and exposing democracy's absurdity became a key theme in his work. These unsparing government reports made Mark Twain a thorn in lawmakers' sides, and he was soon fired. Later, he joined a small paper focused on local entertainment gossip. As the paper's only reporter, Mark Twain's daily task was hunting bizarre stories to turn into news. When news was scarce, he'd fabricate fire incidents to grab readers' attention. He said, "These soulless, dull reports numbed my heart while writing them." With this mindset, he grew increasingly unmotivated at work. Seeing his inefficiency, the boss gave him an assistant. He then slacked off completely, and months later, the assistant handled all the work. Finally, the boss fired Mark Twain. But this didn't crush his spirit. Before reporting, he'd been a newsboy, sailor, and gold miner. These diverse experiences and innate adventurousness gave him a unique perspective on unemployment. He excitedly declared, This is my first and only firing experience. A vast world opened before me, even with nowhere to go. Unemployed, he spent 3 months mining for gold, but returned empty-handed. Ironically, a year later, massive gold deposits were found exactly where he dug, just missing his chance at sudden wealth. Repeated failures left him financially strained, yet he remained optimistic, believing God would send needed money at the right time. The autobiography also tells an interesting story about making money. At that time, Mark Twain desperately needed $3, and he wandered the streets trying to get this money. When he walked into a hotel lobby, a very cute dog ran up to him, and coincidentally, a general saw the dog and liked it very much, mistakenly thinking Mark Twain was its owner. A general asked if he could transfer the dog, and Mark Twain had a sudden idea and said yes, for $3. The general was very surprised, thinking the dog was worth at least $100, but Mark Twain insisted on selling it for only $3. After selling the dog, Mark Twain didn't take the money and leave. Soon, a gentleman was looking everywhere for the dog. Mark Twain told him he could help find the dog. They agreed that if he found it, he would get $3 as a reward. Later, he went back to the general, said he regretted it and didn't want to sell the dog, returned the money, and took the dog back. Thus, he returned the dog to the gentleman and earned $3 as a finder's fee. About this incident, Mark Twain said, "I felt perfectly justified. That dog seemed like it was arranged by God. Although the $3 from selling the dog didn't belong to me, the $3 for finding it was earned. Not using unearned money is a principle I've upheld to this day." And during this period of unemployment, Mark Twain mainly relied on taking scattered interviews to sustain his livelihood. And once, he was invited by a newspaper to conduct interviews in the Hawaiian Islands. Coincidentally, a group of survivors from a shipwreck had also drifted to the island. These people had been stranded at sea for 43 days. He realized the news value of this story and worked overtime to report on it. This chance opportunity became a turning point in his career, not only earning him 10 times his usual fee, but also getting invitations from several theaters to give speeches about this news. Back then, speeches were somewhat similar to today's stand-up comedy. If done well, one could gain both fame and fortune. Mark Twain decided to seize this opportunity and go all out into the field of public speaking. However, his first speech had only one attendee. Even with just one listener, he was very nervous. He said, "At that time, I was so scared my legs went weak, it felt worse than death." But Mark Twain didn't give up. He quickly figured out the techniques of public speaking. For example, how to increase comedic effect through repetition and how to throw out topics to attract the audience. Plus, he was naturally a well-traveled and eccentric thinker. His speeches attracted more and more people, gradually making him one of the most popular speakers of the time. Meanwhile, Mark Twain also made new breakthroughs in his writing. While working as a reporter, he occasionally wrote some sketches. In 1865, by a chance opportunity, his short story, "The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County," became popular. This story tells the humorous tale of a gambler who tries to make money with a high jumping frog, but ends up losing everything, satirizing the prevalent materialism and speculative mentality in society at the time. This little story was published in the final issue of the Saturday Press, a newspaper about to shut down. Many other newspapers, while reporting on the Saturday Press's closure, reprinted this article, making the jumping frog widely known. However, Mark Twain's fame didn't rise with it. He gloomily said, "It's the frog that's famous, not me." It wasn't until 2 years later, when his collection, "The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County and Other Sketches," was published and sold well, that Mark Twain's identity as a writer gradually gained recognition. After The Jumping Frog, Mark Twain's writing entered a period of explosion, publishing numerous popular works. The income from royalties and speeches gradually eased his financial situation. With money in hand, Mark Twain unlocked a new chapter in his life's adventures: investment and business ventures. After entrusting others to publish several books, Mark Twain realized that most of the profits from his hard-written novels went into the publishers' pockets. So he founded his own publishing company, deciding to publish only his own books. But soon he broke this principle by publishing a memoir for General Grant. General Grant was a renowned American military strategist, politician, and the 18th president, highly respected at the time, and someone Mark Twain greatly admired. After retiring, General Grant decided to write a memoir. Mark Twain happened to hear about this, and initially he inquired out of curiosity about General Grant's writing progress. But he discovered that the contract General Grant had signed with the publisher was very unfair. Recalling his own experience of being exploited by publishers, he felt indignant for the general and proposed publishing the book himself. However, during the publishing process, Mark Twain didn't offer any editorial suggestions for General Grant's autobiography. Faced with Grant's confusion, Mark Twain said, "Just as Columbus's cook shouldn't know how Columbus navigates, I truly can't predict whether my advice would be useful." Beyond his publishing ventures, Mark Twain was also a tech enthusiast, tirelessly developing new patents and striving to turn them into real products. Mark Twain's first invention was an adjustable clasp, later used in women's bras, greatly simplifying their use, still widely used today. He also invented a glue-free scrapbook fabric that earned him money, but in investments, he wasn't so fortunate. Well, he invested in various strange inventions like steam engines, pulleys, and new furnaces. After spending all his money with no return, he admitted he wasn't cut out for investing or getting rich. Focused on writing and tech investments, Mark Twain entrusted his publishing company to a friend who betrayed him, usurping control, signing loss-making books, and bankrupting the company. As owner, Mark Twain was saddled with debt. At 58, crushing debt and betrayal plunged the usually confident man into despair and anxiety. He wrote, "When a man falls at 58, 98% never rise again." But his distress didn't last long. His wife calmly devised a debt repayment plan. She told Mark Twain they'd repay all debts within 4 years. With his wife's support, he resumed global speaking tours across Australia, India, and South America, later writing the acclaimed Following the Equator based on these travels. As his wife predicted, Mark Twain cleared all debts in 4 years. In 1900, after years abroad, he returned to America amid fanfare, becoming a literary titan and celebrated orator. Well, we've covered Mark Twain's 3 fascinating life chapters. Finally, we'll share his happiest and saddest story. Earlier, we mentioned how Mark Twain's wife always calmed his anxieties. Mark Twain said, "In foresight, wisdom, perspective, and character, my wife was the most perfect person I knew, their meeting steeped in romance." In the summer of 1867, Mark Twain traveled to Europe and the Middle East for interviews. On a cruise during the journey, he accidentally saw a photo of a woman in a man's hand and instantly fell in love at first sight. After disembarking, he met the owner of the photo and soon began a passionate courtship. However, Mark Twain's courtship wasn't smooth. He said, "I'd lay siege to her house periodically, but was rejected 3 or 4 times until fate intervened." This fate was a carriage accident. Just as Mark Twain was leaving after another failed siege, he was hit by a carriage right outside the door. He wasn't hurt but pretended to faint, then used recovery as an excuse to stay at her house for 3 days. The sudden accident and 3 days together made her realize her feelings for Mark Twain, and she agreed to marry him. What after marriage, they had 3 daughters, and family life was very happy. His wife was also the editor of Mark Twain's manuscripts, often revising them with their daughters. So, the usual process, his wife would read the manuscript aloud with a pen, and the children would watch vigilantly, searching for inappropriate words like treasure hunters. Oh. Then they'd excitedly shout, "Here!" Mark Twain would plead for those words, begging his wife not to delete them, a joyful family time. Mark Twain enjoyed this. He was a playful father who often deliberately inserted vulgar words to amuse the kids. Moreover, he never dismissed children's opinions. He kept a notebook recording their words, saying, "Children's speech has natural beauty and simplicity." My reverence for these words grew over time, but this loving family didn't remain happy forever. In Mark Twain's final 20 years, his wife and daughters passed before him. First was his eldest daughter, his favorite, outgoing and linguistically gifted. At 14, she even wrote a brilliant short biography of Mark Twain. But while Mark Twain toured to repay debts, his eldest daughter suddenly died of illness. He didn't even see her last moments. The death of my eldest daughter felt like the beginning of a nightmare. A few years later, my wife also passed away due to illness. Mark Twain said, "My wife's departure left me in constant sorrow and confusion day and night. I couldn't stop missing and mourning her. I couldn't do anything else. She was my life. When she died, I became a beggar." 5 years after his wife's death, his second daughter married and moved to Europe. That same year, his youngest daughter suddenly fell ill and died at home, plunging Mark Twain into deep sorrow. He wrote the final passage of this autobiography. He said, "I was certain that as long as the two of us, father and daughter, were together, we were a family. But now she lies in the tomb." 4 months after his youngest daughter's death, Halley's Comet visited Earth. 2 days later, Mark Twain died suddenly of a heart attack, ending his earthly adventures. During Mark Twain's lifetime, someone pranked him by publishing news of his death in a newspaper. Friends and relatives flocked to his home to mourn. When they discovered the deception, they angrily condemned the newspaper. But Mark Twain humorously said, "The report of my death is absolutely true, just a bit premature." Now, this master of humor has long departed with the comet. The words he wanted to say to the world, we can only find in his works. That concludes our interpretation of Mark Twain's autobiography. Keynotes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.